News at 11 on WRIC.
Welcome back. They were deemed unfit to reproduce, sterilized against their will. Now victims of the Commonwealth's efforts to create a super race are again calling on lawmakers to make amends.
Investigative reporter AJ Lagoe has been covering this issue for more than a year now and has an update.
With Virginia lawmakers going into session here this week, they're facing renewed pressure to compensate victims of the Commonwealth's efforts to create a super race.
I love my country. I fought for it, and I still fight for it again.
Marines have a saying, once a Marine, always a Marine. Lewis Reynolds served our nation in uniform for 30 years, fighting in both Korea and Vietnam.
I thank the good Lord I served my country, and I thank him for let me live as long as I have.
But now, this 86-year-old Marine is at the center of a new fight to right a wrong that's...
People don't understand my feelings.
To begin to understand what happened to Reynolds and thousands of others, you need to look back to 1924. The infamous Virginia Eugenical Sterilization Act is passed. It was based on the now discredited science of eugenics, which had the stated goal of ridding society of those considered defective, those whose offspring might burden society, those with unfit human traits. Virginia law declared insanity, idiocy, imbecility, epilepsy, and crime could be influenced by heredity and allowed the compulsory sterilization of those confined to state institutions.
They thought you had epilepsy.
Yeah, but I didn't.
As a child, Reynolds was mistakenly diagnosed as epileptic. His medical records describe him as quiet, friendly, and fairly intelligent. But they go on to say sterilization is indicated as it will take a big burden off him in the future.
Took my rights away from having a family and have children and grandchildren where they can watch out for me when I got older.
State records show from 1924 to 1979, Virginia sterilized 7,259 people like Lewis Reynolds.
These people here operate on me for no reason whatsoever. They didn't have to operate on me.
People like Anna Seal.
I cried when I got sterilized. Couldn't have no kids. And I love kids myself, but I couldn't have none.
People like Janet Ingram.
This happened to both you and your sister.
Yeah, all of us. I had 4 sisters. All of us was done.
We should do something about it.
Mark Bolt, the executive director of the Christian Law Institute, has been trying to find and assist those affected by the eugenics law.
When you take a look at this harm, the harm was so egregious that it sought to eliminate entire classes of persons.
Bolt is working with the unlikely political pairing of liberal Democrat Patrick Hope and conservative Republican Bob Marshall.
When Delegate Marshall and I agree on anything, people ought to take notice.
Despite failing last session, the delegates are reintroducing the Justice for Victims of Sterilization Act, which would provide $50,000 to each living victim in Virginia. Critics have balked at the cost, claiming the state doesn't have the money. While lawmakers here failed to take action during the last GA session, just to our south, North Carolina passed a law in 2013 to compensate citizens it forcibly sterilized.
North Carolina has adopted a bill that would provide $10 million to their citizens, and yet, again, we haven't done anything.
With lawmakers now back in Richmond for the start of the General Assembly session, the Commonwealth's sterilization victims
I didn't want to have it done. I didn't want to have it done.
can only hope Virginia will follow North Carolina's example.
I don't even want to think about it sometimes, I'll be honest with you.
In 2002, then-Governor Mark Warner officially apologized for the selective breeding policies as Virginia prepares to swear in a new governor here this Saturday. Many eyes will be watching to see if he and the 2014 General Assembly will offer up more than words. At the Capitol, AJ Lagoe, 8 News.
Thank you, AJ. The Christian Law Institute is still working to determine just how many of these Virginia sterilization victims are still alive.
So far, that number is around a dozen. They're still asking potential victims to contact them. We put a link to their website on ours at WRIC.com. Reporter AJ Lagoe has an update now on his ongoing series, Unfit to Breed.
On a frigid day at the Capitol, with icicles forming outside, there's renewed hope of a warming inside the halls of power towards compensating the living victims of Virginia's efforts to create a super race.
This is something that has to be rectified, not just with soothing words but with actions.
It was the actions of the state that robbed now 86-year-old Lewis Reynolds of the ability to have children.
I wonder what kind of father would I make if I had a family. But I do not have one.
The retired Marine Corps sergeant is one of more than 7,000 Virginians forcibly sterilized between 1924 and 1979 under the Commonwealth's Eugenical Sterilization Act, which was based on the now discredited science of eugenics. Eugenics had the stated goal of ridding society of those considered defective, those whose offspring might burden society, those with unfit human traits. Virginia law declared insanity, idiocy, imbecility, epilepsy, and crime could be influenced by heredity and allowed the compulsory sterilization of those confined to state institutions. As a child, Reynolds displayed signs of epilepsy and was sterilized by court order.
I cannot look him in the face and say, we're sorry, go away, and, all things are well. They're not all well. And that's why we are here today.
Conservative Republican Bob Marshall and Liberal Democrat Patrick Hope typically don't agree on much.
We stand in front of sundials and dispute the time. But on this, we have no difference.
The unlikely duo have joined forces to sponsor a bill that would compensate the living victims of the sterilization law out of the state's surplus budget.
Today, we're calling on Governor Terry McAuliffe and the Virginia General Assembly to take decisive action for the decades of policy that sterilized thousands of Virginians.
The measure failed last year, but the hope is that with North Carolina recently agreeing to compensate its sterilization victims, similar winds of change may also be blowing in Richmond.
People like Lewis Reynolds can't afford to wait any longer. Let's get this done in this session.
One of the big remaining questions is just how many of these sterilization victims are still alive here in the Commonwealth. A toll-free hotline's been set up and also a website. We've put links to both on our website at WRIC.com. At the Capitol, AJ Lagoe, 8 News.
Payments for victims of Virginia's forced sterilization policy have been delayed once again.
State lawmakers voting now to push legislation to compensate the victims to next year. AJ Lagoe reports from the state capitol.
Life is filled with steps, some forward, but for Virginia's sterilization victims today, it was a step backwards.
How disappointing is it to walk out of there and be told, come back next year?
Shoot, I don't know why they're going to ever pass it. They don't give me no hope.
Lewis Reynolds is used to having no hope. The 30-year Marine had his hopes of having a family ripped away when he was just a boy. Because he displayed signs of epilepsy, he was sterilized by the state to take a burden off him in the future. A future he's now living all alone.
I don't have nobody to take care of me by my own self.
Reynolds and Virginia's other sterilization victims
I've been here 2 years in a row.
have been lobbying for Virginia to compensate them $50,000 each out of the surplus budget.
They took away what we could have.
Today, Delegate Bob Marshall stood before a House Appropriations Subcommittee presenting his Justice for Victims of Sterilization Act.
Nobody would dispute that a grave injury was done.
No dispute from across the political spectrum.
Chris, friend of the Family Foundation, supported this bill.
Representing the statewide organizations of Planned Parenthood, we are also supportive of this bill.
I have never seen a bill which was supported by the Catholic Bishops of Virginia, the American Civil Liberties Union, Planned Parenthood, and myself.
Despite the likely first-of-a-kind solidarity, committee members were not moved to action.
We don't know what we're dealing with. I'm going to move we carry this bill over.
You know you're dealing with 10 people who have been sterilized.
Marshall, I don't want to get in a running debate.
To me, this is simply an effort to dismiss one more year the cry of justice.
Committee members said they want to do something.
We're going to take a look at it and see what we can do. Action will be taken?
Thank you.
Action will be taken?
I can't promise you action will be taken.
Do you think you'll live to see the day they pass this?
I don't know. I'll be 87 this year.
87 years. That's a life with a lot of steps. Today, those steps carry the weight of another year of rejection. At the Capitol, AJ Lagoe, 8 News.
Virginia sterilization victims could now be compensated after the state took away their ability to have children.
Investigative reporter AJ Lagoe joins us live now with an update on his continuing series, Unfit to Breed. AJ?
Juan, Christina, in a surprise move at the General Assembly, the House of Delegates has included funding to provide $25,000 beginning next year to victims sterilized in Virginia's quest to build a master race. But some say it's too little and too late. The sun is shining in Richmond, and just like the icicles that have melted away, there appears to be a thawing towards providing compensation to victims of Virginia's now discredited eugenics program.
They took away what we could have.
More than 7,000 Virginians were deemed unfit to breed and forcibly sterilized at state hospitals during the last century. The survivors, so far only 10 have been identified, have been calling on state lawmakers to offer up more than words of apology and make reparations for stealing away their ability to have children and grandchildren.
I don't have nobody to take care of me but my own self.
Lawmakers have repeatedly balked. This was the scene on February 5th.
We don't know what we're dealing with. I'm going to move we carry this bill over.
You know you're dealing with 10 people who have been sterilized.
Marshall, I don't want to get in a running debate.
To me, this is simply an effort to dismiss one more year the cry of justice.
So we're going to take a look at it and see what we can do. Action will be taken? Thank you. Huh? Action will be taken? I can't promise you action will be taken.
Despite their unwillingness to make a promise, members of the House Appropriations Subcommittee did make an effort. In a budget amendment issued this week, they recommend setting aside $500,000 to compensate some of our most vulnerable citizens who were subjected to forced sterilization. But here's the catch. The fund would only provide $25,000 per victim, half of what those sterilized in North Carolina were awarded just last year. And the money wouldn't be made available until next year.
I think it's just another effort to, honestly, kick the can down the road.
Mark Bold, the director of the Christian Law Institute and an advocate for the sterilization victims, is criticizing the House proposal.
Restitution is the only barrier against a tyrannical government.
In an email, he writes, to suggest that victims should receive half the amount that of North Carolina's victims is a disgrace. Sterilization victims here are of no less value. Later this week, delegates Marshall and Hope, the co-patrons of the Justice for Victims of Sterilization Act, are expected to ask the full House to increase that funding to $50,000 per victim and make it available this year. We'll let you know what happens. AJ Lagoe, 8 News.
Meanwhile, Virginia sterilization victims were at the General Assembly today expecting a debate over how much compensation they'd be given after the state took away their ability to have children.
But that did not happen. 8 News investigative reporter AJ Lagoe has new information in his continuing series, Unfit to Breed.
You're not worth the time it would take to even debate the issue. That's the message Virginia sterilization victims walked out of the General Assembly with this afternoon.
They passed us by again.
Janet Ingram is normally a stoic woman, but walking out of the General Assembly today, she was in tears and wanting to give many of Virginia's delegates a piece of her mind.
Having they like a knife in their stomach.
Is that what you feel like you got?
Yeah. They don't know how. They don't know how it hurt.
Janet, her sister Sadie, and Marine Sergeant Lewis Reynolds,
I think they're doing wrong, myself,
have become the face of the 7,000 plus Virginians deemed unfit to breed, involuntarily sterilized by the Commonwealth from the 1920s through the 70s. They sat in the balcony of the House of Delegates today, even received a welcoming ovation when introduced by Delegate Bob Marshall, who's been championing legislation to compensate them.
I hope the members will understand that these victims are watching us today.
Earlier in the week, the House Appropriations Committee released a proposed budget that included money, $25,000 apiece, to compensate the living sterilization victims. But that $25,000 is only half what North Carolina just last year provided to the people it sterilized.
Last year, we had $585 million in surplus, and we're asking that the amount of the award match that which North Carolina gave of $50,000.
But when Delegate Marshall asked for a vote to increase the funding, he and the victims got a legislative brush off.
I move to pass by the amendment.
Legislators would not even consider voting on the issue.
I think it's disgraceful, to say the least. They deserved an up or down vote, and I think passing by it was just pure cowardice on their part.
The elderly sterilization victims left feeling dismissed, unimportant, as if having their right to a family had been ripped away all over again.
Hold right away from me. I can't have a family.
The victims and their advocates are asking Governor Terry McAuliffe to meet with them. He'd have the option of finding additional funding in the surplus budget to compensate those deemed unfit to breed. In Richmond, AJ Lagoe, 8 News.
It was just plain wrong, and we need to do something about it.
That's Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe promising to work to compensate Virginia's forced sterilization victims.
All right, News investigative reporter AJ Lagoe has this update in his continuing series, Unfit to Breed.
We asked Virginia's new governor,
obviously this is a very serious issue,
what he plans to do to right a century-old wrong.
Are you planning on trying to find some money in the budget to compensate these people for what was taken from them?
I do. I plan on working to see what we can, we're beginning the discussions now.
But Virginia's forced sterilization victims,
They took away something that I could have.
those deemed unfit to breed.
I don't have nobody to take care of me but my own self.
Those condemned to a life with no chance for children and grandchildren.
They don't know how. They don't know how. It hurt.
Want more than discussion.
I'm going to move we carry this bill over.
The victims have seen enough discussion from state lawmakers.
I move to pass by the amendment.
The past 2 years to last 2 lifetimes.
They passed us by again.
In the name of creating a master race, the Commonwealth, under the pseudoscience of eugenics, forcibly sterilized more than 7,000 people between 1924 and 1979. It was done to those deemed afflicted with insanity, idiocy, imbecility, feeble-mindedness, or epilepsy. A boy named Lewis Reynolds, who would grow to be a Marine sergeant and lead men in battle in 2 wars, was sterilized at a Lynchburg State Hospital because he was having seizures.
I think they're doing wrong, myself.
For the past 2 years, a bill to compensate the victims, $50,000 each, has been introduced in the GA, but has met resistance. And what supporters describe as throwing the victims a bone, the House of Delegates just proposed giving each of them $25,000, half of what North Carolina sterilization victims were awarded just last year.
$50,000 for what was taken away surely isn't any award that is outrageous.
And for many, this is about more than money. The original proposed compensation bill would also allow immediate family of deceased victims to see state records about their relatives, records that are presently sealed.
My mom had a baby when she was pregnant, and I don't know what happened to it. They didn't tell us.
You want to be able to get those medical records to find out?
Yes.
The victims are now turning to the governor as a final hope, asking him to amend the budget to provide them a small measure of justice. When we asked Governor McAuliffe what his plans are, the businessman who wants to focus on jobs and the future admits, in this case, he'll have to address the past.
It was just plain wrong, and we need to do something about it.
Is that something you think could happen this year?
I would hope so, sure, absolutely.
So far, only 10 living sterilization victims have been positively identified, but that number has now dropped to 9. Mr. Raymond Bowen of Lynchburg just passed away in mid-February, never knowing if his home state would truly make amends for one of the most shameful chapters of its past. AJ Lagoe, 8 News.